They say the Roma don't belong here, that they wandered in from nowhere, rootless, foreign, forgotten. But what if that's not just wrong? What if it's the opposite? Because buried in their blood is something Europe didn't expect to find. A signature. Ancient. Relentless. A genetic marker, HM82. Carried by fathers, passed down like a secret code. It doesn't whisper of Europe's noble bloodlines. It screams of somewhere else entirely. The Indian subcontinent. Not metaphorically, literally. This Y chromosome traces 5,000 kilometers east, to the plains of Punjab, to the ancestral spine of Rajasthan, to a place Europe never claimed, yet somehow never let go. And here's the twist. This marker is still alive. In tens of thousands of Roma men across the continent. After slavery in Wallachia. After sterilization in Sweden. After the Porajmos, when the gas chambers filled not just with people, but with generations. Still, the code persisted. It survived fires, ghettos, gallows. It survived because it had to. Not just as DNA, but as defiance. And yet, no monument honors it. No textbook teaches it. The Roma are still spoken of as if they wandered in yesterday. As if their lineage doesn't walk right alongside Europe's kings and crusaders. But the genome doesn't lie. So if this bloodline began in India, and it's been here for over 1,000 years, then why did Europe spend centuries trying to wipe it from its own map? Why did history call them strangers, when their bones lie under every border? And if this marker survived everything Europe did to erase it, what exactly were they running from when they left India in the first place? It begins in a place that doesn't appear in Europe's memory, but lives in its bloodstream. Not Rome, not Athens, not even Constantinople. Punjab. 1,000 years ago, somewhere near the banks of the Sutlej River, a people began to vanish. Not all at once, not with armies or banners, but in silence, through the edges of empire. Linguists would later trace their language to Sanskrit's shadow. Geneticists would follow their DNA back to Rajasthan's dry wind. But at the time, no one wrote it down. No one recorded the first step of the Roma exodus. What we know is this: it wasn't a migration. It was a rupture. They didn't wander out. They were pushed, or pulled, by something we still don't fully understand. And when they moved, they didn't come as a nation or an army. They came as fragments. A tribe, a caste, a community broken from its origin. And genetically, that fracture left a mark, because the people who made it out carried only what fit in memory, ritual, and blood. Their genomes collapsed into a single thread, a bottleneck so severe, it suggests no more than 1,000 ancestors birthed the entire Roma diaspora. 1,000. From that thread, they stitched a continent-wide presence, stretching from Indian deserts to Iberian cliffs. They passed through Persia, left footprints in Armenia, shadows in the Byzantine world. They arrived at Europe's edge not as conquerors, but as survivors. Yet even today, the contradiction lingers. How do you explain haplotypes from South Asia, in the veins of people Europe called vagabonds? How do you explain a genetic signal that refuses to fade, across 24 countries, centuries later? And if they escaped one fate in the East, caste, famine, war, what did they find waiting in the West? Because when the Roma finally reached European soil, it wasn't freedom that greeted them. It was chains. And what Europe did next would define the next 500 years of their bloodline. They arrived as strangers, and Europe didn't just reject them, it shackled them. Not for a year, not for a decade, for 5 centuries. In the lands now called Romania, Roma families were sold, branded, inherited like livestock. Children born into chains, their names never written, only priced. Slavery didn't just scar the skin, it calcified the bloodline. Because when you trap a people for 500 years, you don't just control their movement, you shape their DNA. Marriage was confined to the enslaved. Love became a closed loop. Over generations, that loop twisted tighter, until the gene pool narrowed into something unthinkably precise. Geneticists call it a founder effect, but for the Roma, it was a prison written in chromosomes. Today, we find the evidence, not in ruins or records, but in disease. Galactokinase deficiency, limb-girdle muscular dystrophy, disorders so rare they barely exist outside Roma populations, yet appear again and again, like a ghost coded into their cells. These aren't just mutations. They're memorials. Each one marks a bottleneck, a moment when a family became a clan became a sub-isolate, and the world outside was sealed shut. And still, the Roma carried songs, wove metal and fire into craft, whispered language through generations, language that was never taught, only passed like an heirloom. Inside those slave compounds, tradition didn't die. It went underground. A hidden genome, a hidden culture, one fed by pain and sealed by design. Because when a people are forbidden to leave, to mix, to move, to forget, they remember with their bodies. And centuries later, their descendants still carry the chemical echoes of captivity. But this wasn't the end of their genetic isolation. It was just the rehearsal. Because what came next wasn't slavery. It was sterilization. And this time, it came with a doctor's coat. They told her it was routine. Just a minor procedure. Nothing to worry about. She signed the papers. Or maybe she didn't. Maybe they didn't ask. When she woke up, something was missing. No scars on her arms, but something deeper had been cut. Quietly. Permanently. Across Czechoslovakia, Sweden, Germany. Tens of thousands of Roma women were sterilized. Not as punishment, as policy. Doctors called it hygiene. Officials called it integration. But what it really was eugenics. And here's the part no one talks about. These weren't isolated acts. This wasn't some rogue moment of cruelty. This was structure. Women were paid, or threatened, tricked, or simply told nothing at all. Consent wasn't in the room. And in the silence that followed, entire maternal lineages were erased before they ever began. From a genetic lens, the damage is chilling. Whole branches of Roma mitochondrial DNA severed. Future alleles never passed down. Bloodlines meant to continue gone. It wasn't just sterilization. It was disruption, a distortion of ancestry itself. And while doctors cut futures from the womb, scientists were quietly collecting blood samples, tissue slides, Roma DNA taken from orphanages, hospitals, even prisons, logged into government archives. Not to heal, to study, to catalog, to surveil. Today, forensic databases in some European countries are disproportionately filled with Roma genetic profiles. Up to 50% in places where Roma make up only 5% of the population. Their DNA doesn't just tell a story. It's used to predict one, track one, accuse one. What happens to a people when their genome, the deepest part of their identity, is taken, cataloged, criminalized? What happens when your DNA becomes a crime scene? There was a camp inside the camp, a barbed wire enclosure, hidden behind the crematoriums of Auschwitz-Birkenau. No train ever left it. No one was transferred out, only in. They called it the Zejunalager, the Gypsy camp. 23,000 Roma were locked inside. Families, musicians, blacksmiths, infants still clinging to breath. They came without knowing that this place was never meant to hold them, only to end them. And on a single night, August 2nd, 1944, the final 4,200 were herded into darkness. Mothers holding children, elders gripping prayer beads. All of them gassed, burned, vanished. The records call it liquidation. The Roma call it Porajmos, the devouring. But what the Nazis destroyed wasn't just bodies. They erased bloodlines. Entire mitochondrial branches, gone in a single sweep. Unique haplotypes, centuries in the making, incinerated before they could pass to another generation. It was genocide at the genetic level, a silencing of DNA. Yet not total, because the ones who escaped, those who ran, who hid in barns, who crawled beneath floorboards, carried more than memory. They carried genetic signatures that still speak. Founder haplotypes, paternal lineages, the same ancient strands that once walked through India, through Persia, through Byzantium, still present in Roma today. A flicker of code that refused to go extinct. And that flicker is all we have left of those who didn't survive. The daughters who never had daughters. The sons who died before they could pass down their name, their face, their blood. But inside every surviving Roma genome, there are gaps, blackouts, spaces where a cousin should be, a sibling, a child who was never born. It's not just trauma that lingers. It's absence. at the cellular level. But even the Nazi ovens couldn't burn away 1,500 years of ancestry. It's not written in books. It doesn't appear in maps. But it's there in the bloodstream. An archive encoded in silence. A history that bleeds forward, generation by generation, without a single word spoken. Look closely at the Roma genome, and you'll find fragments of India still pulsing. Why haplogroup H, M82? A paternal lineage older than Europe's kingdoms. Empty DNA M5A1, M18. Maternal lines born in the soil of Punjab, still alive in villages thousands of miles away. Not in theory, in reality. A child born in Slovakia, carrying the same mitochondrial fingerprint as a woman who lived centuries ago in Rajasthan. And yet, this isn't just ancestry. It's aftermath. Because every rare mutation, every cluster disorder, is a timestamp. Limb-girdle muscular dystrophy, congenital cataracts, galactokinase deficiency. Each one tells you exactly where a community was broken, isolated, reduced to a handful of survivors. Each one speaks of a bottleneck, a slaughter, a boundary they couldn't cross. These aren't just diseases. They're genetic memorials, written into the code of children who had no say in the past, but carry its scars anyway. Even the way the Roma bury their dead echoes an older world. Northwest Indian tribes who place flowers at the threshold, who whisper final words into the soil, who believe the spirit travels by fire. Or the women, who still wear coins in their skirts, not as decoration, but as inheritance, protection, memory. Every pattern has a meaning, every myth a migration path, and every living Roma today, whether they know it or not, is carrying the last pages of a book that was never allowed to be finished. But here's the question. If these ancient lineages survive only in trace amounts, if each generation forgets just a little more, loses one more story, one more language, one more marker, then what exactly are we witnessing? A miracle of resilience? Or the slow unraveling of a people, one silent gene at a time? Is this survival, or a slow erosion? They didn't burn books. They burned language. Not with fire, with silence. One law at a time. Roma words were banned in schools. Their songs labeled primitive. Their clothing, too loud, too wild, too other. In Czechoslovakia, in Hungary, in France, governments began erasing without blood. No camps this time. Just policies. Stop the marriages. Break the clans. Take the children. And they did. Thousands of Roma kids were taken, placed in state homes, forced to speak foreign tongues, told their families were criminals, or worse myths. Girls were stripped of their headscarves. Boys forbidden to learn the trades of their fathers. Entire generations folded into a silence that sounded like progress. But under the skin, the past held on. Because culture can be buried. But DNA doesn't forget. In trying to scrub Roma identity, Europe made it stronger. Not in the open, but in the genome. The more families were broken, the more the bloodlines narrowed. The more communities were scattered, the tighter the endogamy loop became. And so the very pressure designed to erase them, preserve them, in their chromosomes, their haplogroups, their rare mutations, the story kept printing itself, generation after generation. You hear it when an elder whispers a lullaby she was once beaten for singing. You see it in a wedding dress, stitched by memory, not pattern. You feel it in the pause, the hesitation, when a grandmother describes a festival she no longer celebrates, but still remembers in her bones. Because what do you do when even memory is criminal? What do you pass down when you're told everything sacred is shame? The answer wasn't spoken. It was inherited. But when even memory was criminal, how did the genome remember? From the hills of Andalusia to the outskirts of Bucharest, 3 faces, 3 languages, 3 histories, and yet one bloodline. The contradiction is stunning. Spanish Roma, who call themselves Gitanos, dancing to flamenco rhythms that trace farther back than anyone dares admit. Eastern Roma, scattered through Poland, Slovakia, the Czech lands, holding stories and dialects their neighbors never bothered to learn. And the Balkan Roma, rooted in Serbia, Bulgaria, North Macedonia, where memory survives in song and superstition. Centuries apart, yet genetically connected, but not cleanly. Not like a family tree, more like a shattered mirror, each shard reflecting the same origin, but fractured by geography, time, and terror. Their genomes don't match perfectly. They echo. Founder effects, bottlenecks, isolation. In Spain, some Roma show more Mediterranean drift, a shadow of centuries spent dodging conversion laws and assimilation. In the Balkans, it's different. Their South Asian DNA glows brighter. Like the source is closer, the path less diluted. Each group is its own genetic subisolate, a living fossil, sealed by clan customs and old rules of marriage. You don't marry outside the bloodline. You don't speak the names of the dead. You don't forget who your people were, even when the world does. These weren't just cultural beliefs. They were survival codes, woven so deeply into Roma life that even when loss shattered families, the genome held its line. Language lost, homes destroyed, but the blood remains. And inside that blood, a map is hidden, not drawn with ink, not found in books. A genetic map, one that doesn't just trace where they came from, but reveals something far more dangerous, where they were never supposed to exist. They said it was science. They said it was for research, for health, for understanding. But the needles came without consent. In orphanages, in prisons, in camps with no names. Roma DNA, sampled, cataloged, stored in databases they were never told about. And when the data came back, it wasn't used to heal. It was used to profile, to surveil, to predict. Today, in parts of Europe, Roma make up 5% of the population, but half the forensic DNA files. Not because of crime, because of history, because of fear. Because even now, in labs and government servers, their genome is treated not as ancestry, but as evidence. But something changed. Roma scientists, Roma lawyers, Roma mothers, asking a question no one could answer. Who owns a genome? Is it yours because it lives inside you? Or does it belong to the state that took it? They began to fight back, not with fists, but with consent forms, with ethics boards, with demands that the archive built from their blood be opened, explained, returned. Because this isn't just biology. It's authorship. A genome is a manuscript, a sacred scroll of who lived, who suffered, who survived. And while some pages have been burned, erased by slavery, by sterilization, by silence, the story still reads. You can still see the ink, still feel the breath of ancestors between the lines. So who gets to tell it? The institutions that try to erase them? Or the descendants who still carry every punctuation mark in their bones? Who really owns the Roma story? Europe or their bloodline? They were supposed to vanish. That was the plan. Not just to erase their presence, but to scatter their bones so far, no one would remember where they began. But Europe forgot one thing. DNA doesn't obey borders. It doesn't vanish with paperwork, or burn in ovens, or bend to silence. It survives. Across the continent, from Portuguese coasts to Romanian villages, from Slovak fields to Spanish streets, the markers are still there. Roma children born today still carry the same genetic code as those who walked out of India over 1,000 years ago. Not diluted, not overwritten, carried. In wedding songs that still echo rhythms from Rajasthan, syncopated, untranslatable. In curses that bend like Persian grammar, sharp, poetic, dangerous. In stories told beside Balkan fires, voices cracked with smoke and laughter, the same cadence their ancestors whispered when the world refused to hear. This isn't just heritage. It's resistance, coded into biology. Proof that every attempt to eliminate them, every roundup, every ban, every sterilization failed. Because a lineage doesn't live in documents. It lives in blood. And this one never stopped pulsing. Even after the ashes, the silence, the forgetting, the genome kept speaking. Across 10 centuries. Through every country that tried to write them out. M82, M5A1, M18. Not just markers. Monuments. Each one a defiant spark. Each one a name they couldn't erase. Their genome is a rebellion. And its story isn't over yet.